Since I was ordained last year on June the 24th, I've always had issues receiving mail here at St. Faith's. I thought there must have been a post-goblin lurking in the vestry or something, as on occasion people would come to me and say, "I've left something in the office for you." And whilst there was sometimes something there for me on the table, most of the time there was nothing there. Where was all this post going? To be honest, the whole situation somewhat puzzled me, until on Christmas Eve this year, exactly 6 months forward from the day I was ordained, as it was then I discovered exactly what was going on. It was only that day when I found out that I had my own pigeonhole in the office, in which all my post was being delivered to. Somewhat worryingly, at no point in the previous months did it compute in my brain that somewhere there could be an obvious place where all my post was going. And by the time I discovered it, there had turned out to be quite a lot of it. I would like to give thanks to Roland for lending me a very interesting novel, an oceanographic volume. Rosemary for some very interesting information on the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. And to Sheila for a mountain load of paperwork related to the Joy of Christmas event we had earlier in December. Thank you for all of this. And I'm sorry it has taken me so long to acknowledge the mail which you have sent me. But as it turns out in our Epiphany story today, I am not the only person in history that has ever had a late response to something. Today we celebrate Epiphany, usually celebrated on January the 6th, as we celebrate the eventual and somewhat late visit of the wise men to see Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. This is celebrated in many different ways throughout the world. You might remember me telling you just before Christmas that in many parts of the Spanish-speaking world, children get visited on Dia de los Magos by the three kings, Melchior, Caspar, and Baltasar, bringing presents. My brother is currently living in Peru, and whilst the three kings forgot to stop by his house yesterday, he's going to ask his girlfriend today as if that they can arrive a day later than expected. Throughout the world, Epiphany has also been celebrated with a king cake, also known as the Three Kings cake, in which a fev, which is a little trinket, is hidden inside it. This often takes the form of a figurine which represents the Christ child, and whoever finds it in their piece of cake often becomes the king for the day. Being the person that found the Christ child in their cake was a symbol and is a symbol of good luck, and the king often receives a prize. Although in some traditions, this alternatively means that people end up having to pay for either the very elaborate king cake or a round of drinks for all. And finally, ladies, take note. In some places in Ireland, Epiphany is the time of women's Christmas. This is a day when men take on all the household tasks for the day, so women can relax and hold parties together. Maybe this could be one tradition that many of you would be keen to bring here next year. Over Christmas, many of you will have had nativity sets, which show three wise men, who we celebrate at Epiphany, arriving on cue at the same time as the shepherds, with all of them seeing Jesus depicted as a newborn baby. Was this actually what happened? History seems to paint a different picture of the arrival of these three wise men. it was likely that the wise men arrived late on the scene. They would have got to Jesus by the time he was around 2 years old. So, who were these magi, or wise people, that turned up so late? Whilst we may be more familiar with the Roman Empire, to the east of Jerusalem was the Parthian Empire, which is located in modern-day Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran. This is where the Magi came from, and they were not just any old wise men. They were Zoroastrian philosophers who were of great significance and status in their culture as advisors to royalty. We know the wise men for their expertise in following the stars. But to them, the stars were much more than pretty lights in the sky. To ancient cultures, stars were integral to their worldviews, as the stars contained signs which signified information about rulers, power, and the political sphere. To them, in the stars, they would have spotted something unusual in the night sky, identified this to be the birth of a forthcoming king, and then traveled to seek out the place where this was. These magi were not simply great astronomers or stargazers. To describe them as this would be selling them short. In today's language, we might call them polymaths, as they were experts in many different things. And they also wielded great political power and influence over their Parthian kings. The historian Josephus told us that no one could be king in Parthia unless they knew the ways of the Magi and were supported by them. These were great and wise men who attempted to make peace with their foreign neighbors around them. What we therefore see in the coming of the Magi to visit Jesus is also something of a diplomatic mission in following the star, not just curiosity to meet a future king. They visited him just in case this baby in Bethlehem turned out to be a great and powerful ruler. They believed that this baby would become the king of the Jews, and this certainly would not have gone down well with the current king, King Herod. As many of you may know, King Herod wasn't a particularly pleasant chap. And whilst history suggests he wasn't all as bad as he's made out to be, as he did help the land prosper by building aqueducts, theatres, and other public buildings, he was pretty ruthless and did execute several members of his own family, including his wife and 3 sons, on top of the many male infants in Bethlehem. Furthermore, it is also helpful to know that the Parthian Empire, where the Magi were coming from, was not on good terms with the Romans, having previously invaded Jerusalem in 40 BC, forcing the then governor Herod into exile in a fortress in the wilderness of Masada. The Romans then took revenge and retook the area 3 years later, now putting the former governor Herod on the throne as the king of the Jews. Now, imagine the wise men, a few decades later, going up to a fairly unhinged King Herod and insulting him by telling him that a new king was to be born within his lands, which would replace him, by the Magi, who represented a nation who had invaded Jerusalem within Herod's own lifetime. That is nothing short of a brave move by the Magi, as Herod would have certainly seen this as a threat. despite the real purpose of the Magi being to partake in a cross-cultural diplomatic mission and to celebrate a new king of the Jews who was from a different nation, religion, and culture to them. The Magi would have come from a Zoroastrian background and would have worshipped in pagan fire temples. But what is fascinating is that they are the first people in Matthew's Gospel to describe Jesus as the King of the Jews, something which Jesus does not actually get called again in this Gospel until the time of his death. At Epiphany, we remember a time which Jesus is first revealed as King, as this was done by those outside the Jewish community, with them bringing valuable gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which were gifts fit for a king, just as diplomats give gifts to royal figures today. The celebration of Jesus as king by these magi from different faiths is quite amazing. But what is even more so is that this visit from the Magi is still celebrated within the ancient religion of Zoroastrianism today, in which its adherents are still proud that their Zoroastrian Magi went to visit the infant and future king, Jesus. What the Magi would not have understood at this time, however, is that this king would grow up to be much greater than they could ever have possibly imagined. Jesus was not just the King of the Jews, but is the King who reigns over all of us. It is through Jesus which we can now have a relationship with God, which can transform our lives. And the first thing we need to do is to turn and follow him. How closely would you say that you are following God at the moment on a scale of 1 to 10? If you feel like this number is low, as all of us might feel from time to time, remember it is not too late to turn to more closely seek God. It took the wise men up to 2 years from Jesus' birth to seek and finally find him. And surely for us too, this means it is never too late for us to seek God and encounter him more deeply. Amen.